This gate, this wire, mark the border between famine and food, between war and safety. Somali refugees are desperate to get inside. They've waited long enough in the blistering sun. Those who are most in need are picked out of the line and taken inside. But some of them won't be finding sanctuary today. There are simply too many people already inside. Some of those waiting have literally just walked in from the bush with children, some of them born just days before, all of them starving, many of them sick and trying to get in for treatment. They constantly move towards the gate, trying to join those already inside. The organisers try to push them back, but without much success. There was a riot here in June. Several people were killed.
These people who are coming are just like skeletons. These people are dying, you know, for hunger and starvations and the lack of the nutrition. The children are just dying on the way.
The refugees who've already been in this camp for years are trying to bring the newcomers under control. Horai Nur Bule gave birth on the road 5 days before reaching this camp, having walked all the way from her village in Somalia. At least she has her husband and all her 5 children with her. Many women who come here are already widows or have left their husbands behind to look after the last of the family livestock. It's been like this most days since June. That was when the United Nations made official what had been obvious to aid agencies for months, that there wasn't just a severe drought in southern Somalia, it was a famine. More than 1,000 new arrivals, sometimes as many as 1,500, are straggling in here from the bush every single day.
Yeah, that is why probably he did not even collect the food.
It's remarkable that the Dadaab complex of camps runs as well as it does.
Instead of going home.
And that has a lot to do with people like Regina Muchai of the Lutheran World Federation ACT Alliance.
Please go there. I've not seen anything like what I've seen in the past 2 months. And I've spoken to a lot of my colleagues. I don't think anybody experienced this before. You came alone.
At 32 years old, she's the manager of the whole Dagahale camp and its 120,000 refugees.
Let me speak with that boy.
Regina spots a boy who appears to be by himself.
Where are the parents?
It turns out that the boy's parents are still in Somalia.
Come, just stand. Stand up.
He got here just the night before.
Let's move there.
And the reason he'd been sent alone?
He says his parents sent him to school.
His parents sent him. The parents want him to come and study.
Exactly.
This boy is unaccompanied, but he needs to be fast-tracked. The uncle did not come with him. Yeah, so please just let him in. Okay.
Men who've travelled here alone are the lowest priority at this gate.
When did you arrive here?
After women, children, the sick and the elderly.
Okay.
Some of them will spend days here, waiting for the wristband that will entitle them to their first proper food since leaving home in Somalia.
It is sad because everybody here has a story. When you see these men seated here, They may look strong now, but they've left probably families that are weak in the camp.
So when you have to be the one who tells him, you can't do this, it's not going to happen for you today, you need to bring everybody in.
Yes.
It must be hard for you.
Well, it is, because as I've said, you need to speak with everybody independently. Otherwise, even if you tell them in a multitude, you're not really solving a problem.
No.
You need to listen to each one of them.
Of all the new arrivals, babies are the most critically in need. Some of them are sent to a specialist clinic run by the International Rescue Committee. Ibrahim Abdullah is here with the youngest of his 4 children. Aiden is 3 years old and in his short life has known nothing but drought. His growth has clearly been affected.
abaara full noo gashay heeraha waxay joogi waa dhammaadeen beeraha yaa firana jirin beeraha abaara ka dhacday yaa meesha ka soo cararay jidka ay soo maray 25 beri 15 meeshi ana jidka soo haya abaar baaha yaa ilmaha ka soo wada yaa ilmaha hooyadooda meel oo arwew iyo baaway la manadooda meeshi yaa iga dhimatay.
Dr. Humphrey Musyoka has been concentrating on this 11-month-old child who's been vomiting and feverish.
The child's weight is 5 kilos, which is quite low for an 11-month-old child, who should be around 10 kilos. So that's half the weight. The hair distribution is sparse, the hair is thin, it's obviously wasted. What is a very clear sign or an indication of malnutrition is wasting of the muscles. Yeah? So when you lift the child up, the muscles of the buttocks are completely wasted. Yeah? So that's a very clear indication that this child is severely malnourished.
Dr. Musyoka and his colleagues are dealing with up to 6 new cases here every day. But this hospital is also bracing for the wave of refugees that they know are still coming. The hospital's been given tents to turn into new wards, but they can't open them yet because they can't find a way to keep them warm enough at night.
For our feeding program, our return rate has not been that bad. But now with the existing numbers and the increasing in new arrivals, then really anything can happen.
So why is this international emergency happening? Well, the worst drought in the Horn of Africa for 60 years has wiped out the food supplies on which 11 million people depend. The UN predicts that all of southern Somalia will be in famine within a month. It's a catastrophe. And it's questionable whether Somalia's drought would have ever become a famine were it not for Al-Shabaab. The Islamic militia has been fighting for control of southern Somalia against an internationally recognised interim government. Al-Shabaab insists there is no famine. The UN says tens of thousands have died because relief aid couldn't be delivered to the starving. And while some Al-Shabaab fighters have withdrawn from the capital, Mogadishu, food distribution is still an incredibly difficult operation. Nuro Somo certainly didn't wait for the official announcement of a famine to flee with his 3 wives and 20 children.
Kan Isaac, kan Mohammed, kan Hussein. Gabadha waxa weeye Khadijo, kan waxa weeye Ibrahim.
Nuro Sumo arrived here 2 months ago.
Tan waxa weeye Muslumo.
Back in Somalia, he was a farmer with 3 hectares of land, which he says made him a wealthy man, until the drought and the Al-Shabaab militia took control. When you said no to Al-Shabaab, you can't take my children, what happened then? Security along the Somalia-Kenya border has been a concern for a long time. There's a paramilitary police presence even on the tracks that run between the refugee camps. The Kenyan government is worried that Al-Shabaab could try to use this exodus of refugees as a cover to try to infiltrate its people into the camps. The Kenyan government is looking for something different. They're of course worried that Al-Shabaab are going to come in, and in groups like this. Is that an issue?
When you see the situation, it's not in the mind anymore for us as humanitarian workers, but at national level it's always a concern.
Dadaab was once a small town. Just a few thousand people lived here, mainly ethnic Somali Kenyans. But the outbreak of war in Somalia 20 years ago changed all of that. The refugees who arrived back then settled in 3 main camps: Ifo, Dagahale and Hagadera. And most of them have never left. The camps were built to hold a total of 90,000 people. Now they're jammed with 4 times that number. In July alone, there were more than 40,000 new arrivals. Shankaran Ahmed's family moved to Kenya from Somalia generations ago. She's a social worker in the camps.
And you see some cases like mothers, when they're coming here, maybe children become sick and they're forced to leave them on the way. So they just come alone here, and when we ask them, they say that I couldn't take care of them, so I had to leave them. Maybe they're eaten by hyenas, something like that.
And how many people are telling that story?
We get a lot of those cases. Like, first of all, they don't want to give that information. They say that they'll get arrested, but we just convince them that it's for their own good that they tell us, so that we should know how to help them.
New arrivals can often spend days waiting to be admitted to the initial reception centre. They're given emergency rations that are meant to last 3 weeks. That's because the processing system is now so overburdened that it will take at least that long before these people can be officially registered as refugees and given their ration card. People spend weeks walking through the bush from Somalia to make it here. So you can imagine their relief when they finally see it. This is the very edge of the outskirts of the Dadaab refugee camps. And out here, life is very, very rudimentary. It's outside the official borders of the camp, so technically these people shouldn't even be here. But because space inside the official camps is opening up so very slowly, these people have essentially created their own. This place is called the Village of Carcasses, but it's actually very much alive with refugees who are getting on with the business of surviving. First they build shelters. Shelters that may have to last months until tents become available inside the camps, if they ever do. Everything here is makeshift. While the children wait for a place in the official camp schools, a temporary Islamic madrasa is built from sticks. It's a vital space where the children can learn something other than survival. But why isn't more land being made available? I asked Fafa Olivier Attidzah, who's the man who oversees the entire Dadaab camp for the UN.
That message the Kenyan government did not want to pass it on. The Kenyan government did not want to let refugees or Somalis believe that it is just open, they can just be fighting and crossing and coming into Kenya.
This is very tricky territory for the aid agencies working here in Dadaab. Privately, many here say that the reason the new camps aren't being opened up is because of the Kenyan government's fear of having more than 1 million Somali refugees sitting permanently inside its borders. But this is what really frustrates aid workers. It's called EFO2. The international aid agencies have spent millions of dollars building houses, water towers, even toilets here. But the camp is not being used.
EFO2 is open. The Prime Minister has said it. And for us, as UNHCR and humanitarian agencies, for us, EFO2 is open.
When the Kenyan Prime Minister, Raila Odinga, came here in July, he promised publicly to open the new camp straight away. But still, the mud brick cabins are locked and the schools remain half finished. Nothing is moving.
Where we have made some infrastructure, we have decided to revisit the plot size so that we can accommodate more people. That is why we haven't started putting people there. But in the coming 3 weeks, the first people will move into the so-called EFO2.
I would call it politics in a nutshell, because it is difficult for anybody to comprehend a camp that has all the services it deserves, all the services it requires. It has several boreholes. It's still difficult to understand why we cannot move people in there.
But the Kenyan government's reluctance to extend the Dadaab complex of camps isn't just about security. This 20 square kilometre plot has been marked out for new refugees, and the plan is that by November there'll be 90,000 of them living here in this area. Locally, this place is known as Kambi Os. It literally means the place of the long grass. And while it may not look like it, this is some of the best grazing land around. It's actually owned by the Kenyan government. But the people who live in this area do regard it as theirs, and it's where they run their goats and camels. And that is going to cause tension, because in North Kenya there are 2.5 million people who are also living in drought. The pressure to make room for the thousands who arrive here each week is having some effect. This camp is known as EFO3. All these tents have been put up in just the past few weeks. And the first residents are about to move in from the outskirts to the place that will be their home for years to come. As always, there's an air of chaos.
Tell this other group that they just come, let them stay here for a while. They can even sit down around here. Let them sit down, eh? Let them relax.
But here we found genuine happiness and excitement from refugees who'd finally reached the end of the long and frustrating process. After the horrors of Somalia and the journey to Kenya, the constant waiting and queuing, there was finally relief. Not just for the refugees, but for the authorities as well. Now that you've seen how this is working and you know what's coming, how do you think it's going?
No, I think it's going well. It's going well. We didn't expect to reach this far when we saw the situation on the 6th of June. And today when you look at these people with some smile on their face, the assistance is still minimal, but they have access to water, they have access to healthcare, and they are somewhere where, you know, there is no fear for them to be flooded when it rains.
To outsiders, Dadaab might seem like a very large detention camp. But to these refugees, this place offers opportunities they never had in Somalia.
oo doorkii loogu noqon oo meeshan iska joogan isqoolka loo dhigo oo farsamada la baro oo waxyaalo kasta oo alla loogu shaqeynsan jiray aan la barto.
And when he looks at the refugees who've been here for years, he sees something to aspire to.
dadka dal oo guul gaariyo oo hadan wax bartiyo ilmihiisa nidaam ay ku nool yihiin oo wax barti oo horumarad ad gaari oo hada meel kasta oo loo diray aan arktay meeshii oo shaqaale laga rabo oo hay'adda meel kasta aan hadan ku dhagan galay aan arkay. أنا waxaan rabaa in waxaas lii qabto.
A critical step in a refugee's life is to be formally registered as one. These Somalis had boarded buses in the early morning to come here to spend, in many cases, the whole day waiting for registration. This bottleneck is Kenya's Department of Refugee Affairs. It runs what's called the registration tent, the final step when a refugee moves from having a wristband to a ration card and the hope of a new home. It's tedious. Fingerprinting, photographing, interviewing and checking.
I'm sorry, the number which arrives here at E for registration is big, and I'm sorry to tell you that we do send some home for the other day's registration.
It's clear the Kenyan government needs to deploy more people here and to run the process more efficiently. But eventually the refugees do get their ration cards. And once they do, every 2 weeks, they can turn up on their allotted day to one of these warehouses to collect their food. The problem for the UN is maintaining supply, because every day they're going to need to feed 1,000 extra people. That's why the current UNHCR appeal is for $140 million specifically to fund the Somali relief program.
If things continue the way they are in Somali and no intervention in Somali in as far as the drought is concerned, I don't think they have a choice. Kenya is the destination.
So this camp is going to be under even more pressure in the months to come?
A lot more pressure.
Refugee camps can often be places of despair, where people develop a handout mentality. While there's no lack of suffering here, what's striking is the industriousness of the Somalis and their determination to overcome their situation. In the new camp, huts and brush fences go up within hours. Within days, the first businesses appear. There's an open-air factory making mud bricks for the houses the new refugees will soon start building and make their permanent presence in this strange city. It's a city they're forbidden to leave. But Somalis are natural entrepreneurs. And thanks to the money that's sent from Somali relatives around the world, they've managed to create their own self-contained economy. Would most of the long-term refugees be involved in some kind of business?
Yes, most of them are.
Regina Muchai took me to a central market, which sells the items the aid agencies don't provide, like vegetables, meat and clothes. You know, people aren't supposed to leave the camp, yet here in the market you have all of this merchandise. It's not from donors, is it? So where does it come from?
It is, people are in business, and when in business you have to look for where the goods can come from. So clearly, most of these items are coming from Kenya, Garissa and Nairobi. They operate with phones. The mobile phone is very active in Kenya.
These are new clothes. These are not necessarily second-hand, because we've seen a few second-hand clothes shops, but this is new material.
In fact, second-hand clothing here is very unpopular. They prefer cheap new clothes. Yes. And also tailor-made. They buy material, and we have a lot of tailors making these clothes. These are tailor-made. They're made by tailors from on ground.
We're going to be hearing much more about Dadaab over the next few months, as the world's biggest camp struggles with ever more refugees and hot weather arrives in the Horn of Africa. And the fear is that as more of Somalia falls into famine, the physical condition of future arrivals will be even worse than those who are struggling in now. As ever, there'll be more disease in an already overcrowded camp. The challenge for the aid workers here is to resist being overwhelmed. As more than 1,000 new refugees arrive every day, to still find a way to help one individual at a time.